Real Estate Pro Talk with your host, Greg Ernie, connecting people, community and property.
Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of Real Estate Pro Talk. Today we're up to part 2 of our 4 series on the changes to the Residential Tenancies Act, and I want to welcome back again Tracy Russell. Welcome, Tracy.
Thanks, Greg. Good to be back.
Tracy, the next topic, and this is a big one. This is where minimum standards to rental properties. Never before, I guess there's always been acceptable levels and we've always had to have safe properties, but now it's been defined a lot more as to, well, what is the minimum standard? So I'm going to ask you the first question, and we've got a couple here to go through, and I know this will be an in-depth one, but what are the new minimum standards for rental properties for landlords to I guess, understand and what they need to have their property at?
There's heaps.
Right.
So I think a lot of our properties that we manage, a majority of the minimum standards, our properties will be fine. So I'm just going to touch base on some of the items that an owner will probably have to look at doing over time.
Yep.
Keeping in mind, with the minimum standards, some come in earlier than others. So there is a
and probably if I can just jump in there, Tracy, that for those that haven't watched our other podcast, the new Act comes into effect from the 29th of March.
This year.
Some changes have already started to come in and others will be
transitional.
Transitional, thank you. So anyway, you go for it.
Okay, so one thing that's going to be not huge, but a lot of properties will need to be upgraded is with the actual external locks. Oh, sorry, not external locks, but locks to external doors.
Yep.
So basically, all properties will need to have a functioning deadlock. But if you have a lockable security door on that exterior door, then you don't need to have a deadlock. So where you've got the...
So if there's security door, don't need a deadlock, just a normal door handle that's lockable or whatever is fine.
Exactly.
Yep. But if there's no security door, then at a minimum you need the deadlock.
You need a functioning deadlock.
Yep.
So that's going to be probably a bit of a change to quite a few properties, because you might have a lockable handle on your front door, but it's not necessarily a deadlock.
Yep.
If you've got an exterior door, well, you can't physically install a deadlock. So for example, a sliding door. You can't actually put a lockable deadlock on a sliding door. So as long as that sliding door can be locked from the exterior with a key and locked from the inside with or without a key, then you don't need a deadlock.
Yep, good.
Okay.
Yep, yeah, that's good. What other minimum standards?
Heating's going to be a big one.
Yep.
So all residential properties now have to have some form of a fixed working heater in the main living area.
Yep.
So there are some transitional periods for this, because if you've got an existing tenant and there is a heater or no heater in the lounge room, there's nothing you need to do until the 29th of March 2023. But if that tenant vacates after the 29th of March 2021 and a new tenancy is entered into, one, if the lounge room does not have a heater, an owner now has to install a fixed, an energy efficient heater into the main living area.
So I'm thinking this applies to a lot of those homes that were built or units built in, let's say, the late 60s or 70s, where they had the gas wall furnace or something that might have been in the hallway. There's a lot of homes where they didn't necessarily have the heater in the lounge room. No. Obviously, if it's ducted heating, well, that would be okay because it's got the vents through the floor.
You've got the vent, that's fine.
Righto. So just to recap on that one, for landlords that have got one of those properties where there's no heating in the... And I presume, is this for living areas?
For the main living area.
Okay.
So you have to have... a fixed... It can't be a portable heater. It has to be a fixed energy efficient heater.
Righto.
So if there's no heater and you have a new tenancy enter into a new tenancy after the 29th of March, a brand new tenant moving in and there's no heater,
Then
you have to supply a heater in that lounge room.
Gotcha.
If there's already a heater in the lounge room, but it's not an energy efficient one, that's okay. You've got until the 29th of March 2023.
Righto. Yep.
So there's a few different examples there.
So really, today gives a guide, and I think, you know, I know it's been tough enough just for you and our team to get their head around dates and changes and all of that. But if there's any landlords that are looking at watching this video and they're thinking, gee, I'm not sure, well, really, that's where at the end of the day, and I know we'll be in our periodic inspections and routines and those sort of things, we'll be, you know, having a list and checking these things. And but there's a number of things around timelines and so forth. So they're things that obviously, you know, a landlord can contact you or our team and we can work our way through.
Sure, because a lot of those gas space heaters probably aren't a 2-star energy efficient gas heater. So it's okay to have that in the lounge room,
Yep.
but by 29th of March 2023, it does need to be upgraded to the a minimum of a 2-star energy efficient heater.
Righto. So, you know, these are some little things, and no doubt we'll be having conversations with our landlords over the time, but, you know, it might be during the next 2 years that one of those heaters needs something to be fixed on it. Well, it could be at the end of the day, instead of just getting it fixed, let's just put one that is going to be at the right standard, at the right rating, just put the new one in and be done. And Tracy, so what's the go if a property is not up to the minimum standards? Is that just the dates that they need to be conscious of? Obviously, once again, a landlord leaves themselves wide open if they do rent a property to a tenant and their property isn't up to the standard.
So if a tenant accepts a property and they find out that the property isn't up to minimum standards, they can actually terminate that agreement prior to moving in. So that's one. Two, if a renter is already residing in the property and the property isn't up to minimum standards, then the renter has every right to request an urgent repair to bring that property up to minimum standards.
Right.
So an urgent repair has to be acted on as soon as practical.
Urgently within, yep. No, that's all. Is there anything else on the minimum standards that needs to be discussed?
Well, owners will need to consider from the 29th of March 2022, so next year.
Another date.
Another date. So windows in bedrooms and living areas have to have a blind or curtain that can be opened.
Yep.
It has to give reasonable, it needs to be reasonably give them privacy.
Yep.
and block out.
Yep.
So I know in some of the newer homes, and you'd probably see this, Greg, where you've got your brand new townhouses and you've got some of those long, large, high rectangle windows. Not everyone puts blinds on those windows.
Yep.
So now an owner will need to make sure that those windows do have blinds or curtains on them.
Right.
But they've got until March next year to have them installed.
Okay. Yep. Which, and look, you know, the majority of properties, it'll just be tick, no problems. They already meet the standard. So as you say, it's, you know, for a lot of it, I haven't attended anywhere near the training that you have around these new changes. But as I hear you say some of these things, I think, well, that's common sense. That makes sense. So it's not as bad as perhaps the perceptions, but at the same time, they're just some little things that, as you say, it might be just that window that's up above the bedroom, or, you know, that you didn't think of otherwise, but needs a
window covering.
Correct. Yep.
So as we do our routines, what we'll be doing is having a look at the property for some of these items, so we can start to prepare our owners that they'll probably need to start to put some money aside for these items to be done by the requirement date.
Yes. Yep.
So I'm going to use my notes for this one, Greg.
Yes, that's good.
Because by 29th of March 2023, switchboards. So switchboards will need to be upgraded that complies with Australian standards.
Yep.
So days are gone with the ceramic fuses.
Yep.
And you probably see them still in a lot of houses. Now they're going to need to be switchboards with the circuit breakers.
Yep.
And switchboards with the residual current devices that complies with one of the 3 Australian standards.
Yep.
So a circuit breaker protects the wiring and the home. The residual current device protects the person.
Yep.
So by March 2023, any home that you rent out, switchboards need to be checked and make sure they are up to standard.
Wow. There you go. There you go. Interesting. Very. So when just on that, and so when you say, so for our property management team now, obviously we're not electricians.
No.
So does that mean an owner, when they go to rent their property, we're going to need to get an electrician to have a look at, or what's the requirement there?
So we're going to talk about that in the next podcast.
Right. Well, that's probably a good segue in, Tracy. So, is there anything before we move on from our part 2 on minimum standards? Is there anything else that you want to touch on before we go to?
Look, I think they're the biggest concerns that I can see, because they talk about having, in a kitchen, making sure that you've got ovens and cooktops. Well,
common sense.
Yep.
And minimum standards, cleanliness. That applies now.
Showers need to have energy efficient shower heads.
Yes.
A hot and cold tap,
yep.
A shower. Like a lot of the minimum standards, when I look at them, I think we can go tick, 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 tick.
Yeah.
So I don't know in other areas where they've maybe got older homes that maybe, they don't have some of those comforts that we just take, not take for granted, but you would expect.
I think where this may... and look, I know we've always been very particular about what we will manage and what we won't. If it's not at the standard, we won't take it on because it's not worth it, and it's not worth the liability, and it's not worth the risk and the work and everything that goes with it. And
Greg, how your house presents is the type of tenant you'll attract.
Exactly right. But what this does do is for, just as you're running through this with me, is the developer that's buying a property that's eventually going to knock it down in 12 or 18 months. It's a pretty average property, and they don't really care about it, and they're not wanting to spend any money on it.
Well, they don't want to spend the money.
No, and all they're thinking, well, I can find a tenant that just needs somewhere and put them in there, and I can get a bit of rent coming in. Almost in essence now, that builder developer basically can't, or that landlord almost can't do that because they're leaving themselves way open.
There'll be huge penalties for any properties that an owner or an agent, it's up to the agent to deliver this, to deliver the information to the owner. But, it is what it is. It's the act, and you have to comply with it. And there are penalties if you don't. So you're just leaving yourself open, not just for litigation, but to have your insurance voided. If your property is not up to scratch, and it's not, the electrical or the gas works haven't been done by qualified tradespeople, you just avoiding your insurance.
Wow, there we go. Part 2, Trace, you haven't disappointed. There's a lot there to take in for minimum standards. But as we went through that, I think the main thing is a lot of it is common sense. And I know just from what you're saying, the majority of our properties we currently manage, I would say it would be a tick to the majority. Maybe a few little things. I think deadlocks could be something, but maybe the odd switchboard that's not currently that hasn't been modernised. But overall, I think the minimum standard's largely a common sense. So,
and even though with the switchboards it's not in yet, I think to be able to give owner that information to an owner that needs to upgrade, they've got 2 years to
plan for it,
plan for it, budget for it, and have it done. So even though it's not coming in, that they are huge expenses. So to be able to know, okay, in the next 2 years we've got to do that, it's just going to make it easier for them.
Absolutely. Tracy, part 2, thank you. Well done. Well, so the next topic we're going to be covering is electrical, gas and safety requirements. So for landlords, tune in. That'll be our third part of this 4-part podcast. And Trace, I'll welcome you back in a moment.
Great. Thanks, Greg.